just heard in the quote from the Declaration of Independence. We hear about the law of nature, and nature's God. We see self-evident truths. We see that all men are created equal, and that we have the fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property. So how is it that these two individuals, separated by 100 years, could speak the same language and learn to speak the same language? Now, a crude interpretation of history would say that Thomas Jefferson simply read John Locke and copied him. Now, while that's true to a certain degree, it totally misses the mark as to where Jefferson was and who he was and what his life's journey and mission was all about. Jefferson didn't just read Locke. He studied the philosophers of freedom. He grabbed all of the great little nuggets of truth out of those philosophers. He put them all together. He made them a part of him, and then he tried to implement them. Did all he could to implement them. We think that things were easy because all the founders agreed on everything, and it was no problem implementing those things. It was very difficult. Jefferson spent over 30 years trying to implement some of the fundamental principles that to us today seem like no-brainers. Spent 30 years trying to get those into primarily into Virginia. And so that his life's work. So there's something more to it than just simply copying Locke. There's a lot more to speaking the language of liberty than just simply reading somebody and then using their words or parroting that. Now, the title of this particular class is Speaking the Language of Liberty in the Home. Now, when I give this presentation, usually it's to political activists and people who are freedom-minded folks. And so I'm not necessarily going to talk specifically about using it in the home. I'll let you figure out how to adapt this to your home. But as we go through this, you'll learn how this is much more than just getting out there for political speech. It's your everyday language can be so much more effective if you're keeping the language of liberty in mind. And you'll understand that more as we go through. So this is the Declaration of Independence. Can I have somebody from the back go ahead and start there with the... I don't intend to read all this, obviously. I just want to illustrate something that's really quite remarkable. Would you agree that the Declaration of Independence is probably the best example of the language of liberty ever struck off by the mind of man? It really is an amazing document. What's incredible about it is the words in white, which by far, as you can see, the bulk of the document, this is the list of grievances. The list of grievances of a tyrannical king, the actions of a tyrannical king against a free people. Now, those grievances should, it's so discouraging that tyrants do these things that it should have cast a dark cloud over the document. But those two short paragraphs at the beginning and the conclusion at the end shed such a light upon the document that it not only gives hope for America, but for all mankind, and has become a beacon for liberty throughout the entire world. This document is an amazing document. So how is it that those couple of paragraphs overshadowed or scattered the darkness in the list of grievances? Toward the end of Jefferson's life, he was asked, where did you get the language for the Declaration of Independence? He was being accused of stealing it, plagiarizing. You plagiarized George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, or you stole it from this person, that person. In fact, there's a book out there that even talks about how Thomas Paine was the real author of the Declaration of Independence. He was unpopular, so they put Jefferson's name on it. And so this was happening even in his own life. So toward the end of his life, in the 1820s, he was asked by Henry Lee, who was the cousin to Richard Henry Lee, the guy that actually put forth that first motion in the Second Continental Congress that we ought to be independent from England. So Henry Lee asked him, where did you get the language for this? He said, I've got a number of these documents, and it looks like that's where you got the language from. So where did you get it? And so here's what Jefferson's response was. He said, this was the object of the Declaration of Independence. Not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, or merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject. So at first he's talking about wasn't trying to be original. He wasn't trying to win a Nobel Prize here. He was trying to find the fundamental self-evident truths throughout history and put them all together. He wasn't trying to be original. But he wanted to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent. And when I first read this, the first thing I thought of was self-evident truths, right? He wanted to find those things that are so plain and so firm that just by themselves they command assent. They have authority in and of themselves. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail later about self-evident truths and the authority that comes with them. And to justify, now what does the word justify mean?
Balance.
Okay, good definition. Any other ideas? Justify, justice, justification.
Make right.
All that means it's within prescribed law. Now, what law do you think Jefferson's talking about here? We've got really a country that didn't really have any law at this time because we're declaring independence. So what law do you think he's talking about justifies them in the independent stand that they've been compelled to take? Natural law, exactly right. Those natural laws that are so plain and firm that they command assent. Okay? To justify ourselves, so to do it within prescribed law, natural law. And then he continues to go on, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment. So again, I wasn't trying to be original. It might sound like others. It might sound like the Virginia Declaration of Rights, but I wasn't trying to be original, so it doesn't matter if it sounds like that. He says, nor yet copied from any particular previous writing. So even though it sounds like these writings, I didn't take them and copy them directly over. Now here's the awesome stuff he gets into now that gives us the clues on how to speak the language of liberty. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. So we needed to capture the American mind, capture the mind of your audience. Now when I'm talking about audience, as I use that term throughout this class, I'm talking about an audience of a small range of people, like anywhere from 1 to 6 billion. Okay? So anybody you're communicating with is here is what I'm talking about, whether it's one-on-one or whether it's to a group or whether it's to your children or your husband or wife or whatever. Capture the expression of their mind, and then to give that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. Then he goes on, all its authority rests then on the harmonizing sentiments of the day. So it has authority. And where did it get the authority? From the words, from the language, from the harmonizing sentiments of the day, found in conversations, letters, printed essays, or the elementary books of public right as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, Sidney, etc. So words, authority, that's where we got the authority. That's how we know about these natural law principles, because this language of all these different things he's listing here. Now let's consider a couple of these phrases that came out in this era. We hold these truths. All men are created equal, separate and equal station. We, the people, and a person shall be eligible to the office of president. Now these phrases are going to illustrate for us how powerful the language of liberty is. Now all of these you can kind of see how they have something in common. This one you might be questioning, what does that have to do with all the rest? Now the Constitution, does the Constitution mention women? It doesn't. Who else does it not mention? Who else is there? There's only 2 genders, regardless of what society is trying to tell you today. It doesn't mention men. Isn't that interesting? A person shall be eligible to the office of president. It's gender neutral. So did the Constitution prohibit women from holding public office? It did not. Did the Constitution prohibit women from voting?
No.
It didn't. When the founders were talking about who should be able to vote, they're thinking, okay, property owners, yeah, probably men, sure, women, and then they got into it and they realized, why are we even making this decision? There was only one office that you voted for, a federal office, and that was House of Representatives in the original Constitution. And when they were determining who should be able to vote for their representative in the House, they decided, why don't we just let whoever the states let vote in their popular assembly can vote in the federal popular assembly. So if the states allowed women to vote, they could vote. If they allowed a 16-year-old vote, they could. If another one, you had to be 21, you could. That's who voted in the federal election. So the Constitution did not prohibit women from voting. It didn't prohibit women from holding public office. But was that the reality of their time?
No.
No. The Constitution may have allowed it, the states didn't allow it. So this phrase was not the reality of their time. How about these other phrases? We hold these truths. They were still arguing and trying to put in place these self-evident truths. All men are created equal. They still had slavery. All men were not created equal in their eyes, in many ways. Separate and equal station, same thing with slavery. We the people. It wasn't all we the people that were participating in this. Were these the reality of their day? Are they the reality of our day? For the most part, yeah. I mean, we're still working on some of this stuff, but for the most part, yes.
Well, actually, it's not. That's the problem with the Constitution. We, the people, have voted against same-sex marriage, and we, the people, have been overruled by judges. So, unfortunately,
So that's
this is
actually,
happening.
and without going into that subject, because that can be a whole other class, but that's actually the system we set up. We set up a system that isn't just simply a voice of the majority of the people. That's democracy, and democracies always fail. It's mob rule. And Madison said that democracies are just as violent in their deaths as they are in their lives. Benjamin Franklin, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for lunch. Right? So we live in a republic. And so there are times in a republic when the people's voice, we might have a majority of the people saying we should do this, but there's certain laws that prevent the majority from oppressing the majority. Now, you brought up the same-sex marriage issue. We're not going to go to that because that's, again, a whole other class. So regardless of whether it's a good thing or bad thing that the results are happening, it is a good thing that we still are not necessarily operating as a democracy, because democracies are not good. Now, portions of democracy, House of Representatives is certainly a democratic house, small d, not capital D. So we do have the voice of the people still there within our republic, within the Constitution. So we'll have to talk after class more about that, because I can see you've got some
Still, I
skepticism
agree.
there. So, but there's no question, we're still working some of this stuff out, but it's far more the reality of our day than it was their day, right? When you speak the language of liberty today, you will have liberty tomorrow. If you speak the language of captivity today, what will you have tomorrow? Captivity. Words have power. The way you speak today will absolutely result in your future. There's this great quote here. Sometimes it's attributed to Gandhi, but it's actually been traced probably to an entrepreneur around the turn of the century by the name of Frank Outlaw. And he said, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. So your thoughts and your words have results. There's consequences to them. So we want the positive consequences, not the negative ones. So let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to skip through some of these definitions for the sake of time. So language, the expression of ideas by words for the communication of thoughts, or usage of words made the representative ideas. Now this is my favorite definition of language, and this came from the 1828 Webster's Dictionary. When two or more persons customarily annex the same sounds to the same ideas, the expression of these sounds by one person communicates his ideas to another. So we've got these sounds that we call words, and a couple of people agree that those sounds match these ideas. Okay. So it's important that we recognize that in order to communicate using language, more than one person has to agree, same sound, same meaning. we've got to be on the same page in order to speak the same language, right? So that's an important point to remember. And of course, the primary purpose of language is to communicate the thoughts of one person to another. Let's get through this one. So let's talk a little bit about liberty versus captivity, and then we'll get a little bit more into language itself. We find that in order to speak the language of liberty, it's very, very helpful to recognize what the language of liberty and the language of captivity looks like. Sure. Pass those around. I'm passing around a bookmark for you, and on one side it has the characteristics of the language of liberty, on the other side the characteristics of the language of captivity. So here's some of the characteristics of the language of liberty. First of all, the language of liberty, in a nutshell, is being positive, optimistic, and forward-thinking. And here's some of the characteristics: selflessness, positive, optimistic, forward-thinking, hopeful, enlightening, empowering, enabling, vision, motivating, protecting, maintaining, perpetuating, defending, informing, uniting. It's very inclusive, and above all, love. This is one thing that we've really discovered that's important to the language of liberty, is you have to love your neighbor. You have to desire that your neighbor is just as free as you desire to be. The golden rule applies here. If you want to be free, you've got to desire that your neighbor be free as well. As I've studied through this, it's made me understand far deeper why we are told to pray for our enemies. We're told to pray for our enemies, not for them necessarily, but for us, so that we keep ourselves in the right frame of mind to where we constantly want to bring freedom and liberty to everybody, even our enemies. The moment we start wanting bad stuff happening to our enemies, we now are desiring captivity to come upon them, and that brings us into a state of thinking about captivity, not about liberty. Now you'll notice on the bookmark above the list, it says, if you leave your audience with the following characteristics, you are speaking the language of liberty. Same thing on the other side. If you leave your audience with the following characteristics, you're speaking the language of captivity, which is contrarian, contentious, destructive. It's limiting, it's oppressive, it's fearful, doomsday, hopeless, suppressive, subjugation, selfish attacks, manipulative, it's divisive, war, conflict, confusion, and you leave people feeling very lonely. Now the reason why we state there that if you leave your audience is because there may be times when you're speaking to somebody where these feelings definitely exist. If you're explaining to somebody the difficulty, the situation we find ourselves in politically, or if your kids have done something wrong and you're trying to outline and explain to them the bad things that happen when they do those wrong things, of course that's going to bring these feelings. But we never leave them with these feelings. We always want to leave them with these characteristics. Okay? So like when my wife and I, when we're disciplining our kids, we've got a number of different methods of disciplining, but one of the methods, it's one of the easiest, is timeout, right? They just go to timeout. They sit there for a while, think about what they've done, and then we go communicate with them, talk to them about what they've done, ask them what they've done, and we never leave that with them feeling like we're angry or upset. Before they get out of timeout, it always requires a hug, right? You always make up and have fun with the kids and all that. Of course, that's very doctrinal with what Joseph Smith talked about. When you have to chastise somebody or reprove them, then you immediately become even closer to them and show a greater amount of love. So the same thing here. If you've helped some people feel these negative feelings, then make sure that you go back and express these even stronger and positive. Does that make sense? Now, communication is not the words you use. It's the thoughts and emotions and actions that you instill into those who you are communicating with. So if you've left your audience with different thoughts than you intended, then you have failed to communicate. If somebody has misunderstood you, it is not their fault. It's your fault. Because you're the one that's trying to communicate your thoughts to them. the burden rests upon you to make sure that you're expressing yourself correctly, which means you have to know who they are. You have to capture the expression of their mind, just like Jefferson said, capture the expression of the American mind. You've got to understand where they are coming from and where they got their set of knowledge and intellect and their language, and you got to consider their age, and you've got to consider just everything about them, right? Sometimes that's difficult to do. And so one way that we can do that if we're talking with a total stranger is we first listen. Right? That's why listening is so important, to try to understand where they're coming from, capture the expression of their mind. Once you've listened and understand who they are, you can now communicate with them more positively. So let's get into some examples. If you use the word fight, battle, or war when you're talking to people who are politically active, let's go fight for our freedom. We need to go to battle on this issue. We need to go to war on this issue. An activist's interpretation is this. A political activist, they're going to think, a couple of politicians debating, no big deal, this is the American system. Excellent, we love it. But if you go to the general public and you use those same words, how do they look at it? It's a fist fight. And it's very difficult to recruit people into a fist fight. Right? That's why most people don't want anything to do with politics. They're not interested in it. They don't want anything to do with it because it's a dirty, rotten, filthy business. So this is how they interpret it. But if you're trying to get somebody actively involved and you don't want to recruit them to a fist fight, you'd use words that are positive, optimistic, and forward-thinking. Protect, win, bring peace. Now what's interesting about these items is in order to make these things come to pass, what do you need to do? You need to fight, battle, and go to war, right? This is the end result. This is the future. This is the optimist speaking, right? This is saying we're going to win before we've even begun to fight. So it's much more positive and optimistic. If you ask somebody to come join us in fighting for their freedom, this is the vision that they have. You can't fight City Hall, right? It's too big, it's too powerful, it's scary. You're going to be squashed. So instead of fighting for your freedom, you want them to join us in winning their freedom. Positive, optimistic, forward-thinking. You certainly might still be able to have to explain how difficult things might be, to struggle. It's going to be hard, but we can do this. We can win. We can take it. Now, you also have to recognize who you are in relation to your audience. So, for example, if I'm a political activist, and I'm standing up here at the podium and I'm saying, come join me in fighting for your freedom, then if I'm with a bunch of other activists, they're all for it. Oh yeah, we're there. We're going to make some signs, and we're going to get out there, and we're going to rally, and we're going to get our bullhorns, and we're going to go for it. But what if I'm different in their minds? What if I'm a 5-star general, and I say, join us in fighting for their freedom? Now is that language of liberty or language of captivity? Language of captivity. Because now it means taking up arms, going overseas or whatever, and putting your life on the line. And that's a scary thing. Not many people are willing to do that. Thank goodness there are some that are.
So, Bill, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Uh-huh.
I'm not trying to be antagonistic here, because I have a son who's in the military and served 3 tours.
Uh-huh.
But really where my mind is with Moroni. And Moroni did tell them the purpose behind why they're fighting, and people got behind him because that purpose was a righteous purpose.
That's
so
right.
they felt like they were fighting for liberty, but he was that military leader that was saying, come
Absolutely.
fight. Right?
That's,
So
but
by
you look at-
misunderstanding you here, I'm not trying to.
yeah, the illustration that I'm giving here is just that you've got to recognize who you are in relation to your audience. So if I'm just a political activist saying the word fight for freedom, it means something very different than if I'm a general or if I'm Moroni saying fight for freedom. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing from either side. It's just you've got to recognize
How that can be received.
how it's going to be received. Exactly. And so if you're Moroni, if you want to turn it into language of liberty instead of language of captivity, what does Moroni add there?
For our
Captain
lands
Moroni,
and
you've got to do it.
Our wives and our children.
Our wives, our
Right?
children,
Yeah.
our religion, right? Freedom, peace. Again, he's talking about winning. He's talking about he's talking about the forward thinking, the optimism part. So Moroni speaks that language of liberty beautiful as that 5-star general talking to the general public saying, you need to come join me, put your lives on the line. He turns it into language of liberty. So that's exactly it. You've got to just recognize who you are to your audience if you want to speak the language of liberty. And you've got to change your language in order to connect with them. Doesn't mean you're changing your principles or your values or anything like that. You just change your language. Like, for example, if we're out in the world today talking about how about religion in a political sense, how is that? What is the word religion? How is that? What kind of response does that get politically?
Negatively.
It's negative, right? Because what does religion mean in politics today? Churches, okay? Organized church. We've got to have separation of church and state. Today, religion is synonymous with church. In the Founders' era, it was not. Church was church. Religion was your personal relationship with your God. So when the Founders are talking about freedom of religion, and they're talking about freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, and that doesn't necessarily mean worshiping in a church. But we can't use that language today. We can't use religion the same way that they use religion. So today we have to talk about it as freedom of thought, or freedom of opinion, or freedom of... See, so you use different verbiage because we now...
Or didn't our church just finish making a statement in regards to that we should have that right to freedom of religion?
Absolutely, but...
We just recently did that.
Absolutely, but we've got to be careful with who the audience is. If it's an audience that's friendly to that, then absolutely use the word freedom. But if it's an audience that is not friendly to churches, to organized religion, but we still want them to understand the importance of the freedom of thought, the freedom of conscience, the freedom of worship, then we use those phrases, not necessarily religion. Because the moment we say religion, they're thinking Catholic Church, Mormon Church, Methodist. They're not thinking it the way that we're thinking. And see, it's not, we don't speak, we shouldn't be speaking to satisfy our own intellect. We should be speaking to satisfy our audience. You know, so often we'll speak in a way that sounds good to us. Oh yeah, that was good. Boy, that was brilliant stuff. But it didn't connect, and you wonder, well, why? It was brilliant. Why aren't you understanding the brilliance of it? It's because you spoke to yourself. You didn't speak to them. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to jump through that. That's just a good example of changing some language. Okay, so liberty versus captivity. So this last election cycle in Texas, now it doesn't matter which conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, whatever, this example is going to, it works regardless of which side somebody finds themselves on. Some people on the left decided that Texas could be flipped. Texas is a red state. They figured they could flip it to a blue state, or at least make it purple. And they looked at some information on some election results and whatnot, and it looked like it could, just like they did it with Colorado. They came in and they used what they call the blueprint, which is how they did flipped Colorado, and it looked like it was possible. And they came in with a lot of money, highly organized. Anybody who was involved with this or was aware of this particular campaign, it was probably one of the best textbook campaigns there was. But they came in as a Washington, D.C. organization that came in with this campaign called Battleground Texas. Now, if you're a Texan and you've got somebody from Washington, D.C. that comes into your state and says, we are going to change you, so we are going to bring the battle to you to change you. Captivity or liberty? Captivity. Okay? So there's an organization on the right that decided to come in with a campaign and answer this. Again, a Washington, D.C. based organization that came in with come and take it. Captivity or liberty? Again, put yourself in the position of a Texan. Washington, D.C. organization we're going to come battle in your state. Another Washington, D.C. organization coming in and say, all right, okay, we'll meet you there and we're going to battle in their state. Captivity. Who are you to say that we're supposed to be red, blue, whatever? We'll decide that. Okay? So I've got a colleague of mine that had been through a couple of speaking language of liberty presentations, and she calls me up and she says, Bill, I want to start a grassroots campaign to combat this because Texans don't like either one of these things. And so help me come up with a name of a campaign that we can have. So the first thing I did was, again, try to capture the mind of a Texan. Tough to do. They're So I immediately Google it, and one of the first things I come across on Texas, it was perfect. Their Texas state anthem. Anybody know the name or the title of the Texas state anthem? It became the perfect title for this campaign. Because Texans, this is how they're picturing this campaign that's happening now. Texans caught in the middle of these two outside organizations. So the title of the Texas anthem is Texas, Our Texas. So that became a perfect language of liberty title for this campaign because it's our Texas, and this campaign was organized by people from Texas. So we'll be red, we'll be blue, whatever. It's up to us to decide. Texas, our Texas, and then it also personalized it because it was their Texas anthem. And so this is currently actually a campaign that's continually run right now, and it's received very well.
Your language through that was to specifically allow the people, or to put back into the minds of the people that they get to be the ones that choose. That
Yeah.
was your purpose.
Rather than these two outside organizations, it's Texas. It's our state. We'll decide. Right? So an example of language of liberty. Okay. I forgot I still had all these slides in there. Yesterday I took them all out for the youth. Okay, so speak with both your heart and your mind. How are we doing on time? Terrible.
Got all day.
All right, we're going to fly through some of this stuff because this is getting some great material now. As if I haven't already been into it. So speak with both your heart and your mind. Now Jefferson outlines this when he talks about the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. So which one do you think is the mind and the heart and the mind? The tone or spirit? Which is which? Tone, heart, or mind? Mind, spirit, his heart. That's what I thought. So I started going to the 1828 dictionary and started reading some more of Jefferson and whatnot. And here's what's interesting. So tone. Tone is a quality or feeling or attitude expressed by the words that someone uses in speaking or writing. So it's a feeling. It's an attitude. Okay, so this is the heart. Right? The mind, however, number 2 is the great definition there. An immaterial intelligent substance. Right? Intelligences that were organized before the world was. Right? Spirit is a substance in which thinking, knowing, doubting, and a power of moving do exist. So the spirit is the mind. It's our intellect. It's our intelligence. So we speak with both our heart and our mind. Welfare. How do we feel about government welfare?
Captivity, not liberty.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, especially within the church, we know this because of the excellent welfare system that the church has. And the welfare system of the church is really an amazing thing if you think about it. We, of course, help people, and it's a hand up, not a handout, right? In fact, I heard a bishop once say, when somebody was wanting some assistance to help pay for some bills, he instructed them that they needed to take a few steps first. They needed to probably get a less expensive vehicle. They probably needed to cancel their cable. They probably didn't need their cell phones. And when they were getting a little upset about that, he said, hey, the church is here to support life, not lifestyle. I thought that was great. Now, what's the other side of? So our welfare system within the church, of course, is giving to people in need. But what's the other side of it? How do we give?
Willingly, freely.
Yeah, through fast offerings. It is so separated from force or being compelled that that the Lord does not even require any kind of reporting, or he does not require, it's tithing is a question with the temple recommended, right? Fast offerings is not. So the standing of our membership in the church is not connected. So the Lord doesn't even connect fast offerings. He doesn't connect it to anything. He does not compel us in any way to give to the poor. So we've got it's a great system. That really encourages not only for people to try to do better and pull themselves out, and then also locally, handling it all local is also a key ingredient. President Hinckley, who was never a bishop, had made a statement once to the media when they were asking about the church's welfare system. He talked to them about how he has never signed a bishop storehouse order. And the point he was making is here he is the prophet and president of the church, and he has never signed a welfare order, because that actually happens right down at the local level with bishops and Relief Society presidents. Right? The local stake president doesn't do it. So it's great. So the welfare system, the government welfare system, is one that certainly is captivity. But we could go off on all kinds of statistics with people on how welfare doesn't work, and it causes more poverty and all that. We give all these great statistics. And how does that work? We just use only logical arguments.
Works great.
Not interested, eyes glass over, not interested at all. So then you get frustrated, and you get into some emotional tirade about how the poor they just need to go to work, and they shouldn't be leeching off the system, and they're just lazy, and all it does is it just perpetuates laziness, and they just have multiple kids so that they can get more welfare checks, and how terrible that is. Now what does that sound like?
Republican.
Language of captivity. Yes, language of captivity. And how does it sound to your audience?
We don't care.
You don't care. Yeah. And that's actually not true, I'm sure. You care a lot. In fact, it's funny you say that sounds like Republican or conservatives even, because statistically, conservatives give far more to charitable organizations than people on the left.
That's because we choose to, not because we're forced to.
Exactly.
And I was just thinking that that's why people say that, but we're trying to give, so we have to cut back on that, but just who you're talking to is exactly the point, is that who you're talking to. You have to say something else to make them see that.
Exactly. So the point here is that when you speak with just your mind, it doesn't work. When you speak with just your heart, it doesn't work. You've got to speak with both your heart and your mind. Benjamin Franklin handled this issue beautifully. I am for doing good to the poor, but I differ in opinion of the means. This is just my opinion, you say, right? I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading them or driving them out of it. In my youth, I traveled much, and I observed in different countries that the more public provisions were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves, and of course became poorer. And on the contrary, the less was done for them, the more they did for themselves and became richer. So Franklin handles this beautifully. First of all, starts right out, I'm for doing good to the poor. And then he gives some personal experiences so that people can kind of relate, tells a story. And then in the end, he says he wants the poor to be richer. Now, isn't that what we really want for the poor? To be richer, not poorer? And here's my observations. So he handles this beautifully. Not emotional. So when I'm talking about from the heart, I'm not talking about emotional. I'm talking about personalizing it, connecting with the person you're communicating with. Don't get preachy. I mean, at the very beginning, he's like, "Hey, this is my opinion. This is kind of my observations." So he's not getting preachy with him. He's not telling him you're wrong and I'm right. And so he handles this just very, very nicely. So a couple of things that we need to do. In order to be able to speak the language of liberty with our heart, we first need to learn it. We need to learn the language of liberty. And this is understanding the principles and really studying them. That's why Bible, Book of Mormon, and Philosophers of Freedom and all that. Well, one place that you can go to get them all in one tidy little bundle is 5,000 Year Leap. NCCS. Many of you I'm sure are familiar with this book, but it's got the 28 fundamental principles of liberty. This is one of those books that you need to read and reread every couple of years, because this keeps you well versed in the principles of liberty. The next thing you need to do is observe liberty. And the way that we do this is not only in our time and watch and look around us, but history, right? The story that I shared earlier about Reverend Prince at the Old South Church is definitely language of liberty, right? It inspires, and so history is very important. Connect yourself and your children to history and let them observe liberty. And then once you do that, once you learn it and observe it, you've brought it into your heart and your mind. Now it can come out of the mouth and you can teach it. Now that's very biblical, right? What's in here, it comes in your mind, sinks into the heart, and then it comes out the mouth. The scriptures mention that in numerous places. So those are some of the keys. Now, one of the things I want to bring up, since we've only got a couple more minutes, we did get some other fun material, but one thing I wanted to really point out before we close is the power that comes with self-evident truths. I've discovered something interesting in myself in the way that I communicate. I quote the founders just endlessly sometimes. And I discovered that there's different reasons why I do it. Now, I've done it here today to show some examples, but a lot of times I will do it to win an argument. And I will do it because I will quote Jefferson, for example, because what does that do? The moment I'm communicating with somebody and I'm quoting Jefferson, what is that saying? You can't disagree with me, because if you disagree with me, disagree with Jefferson. And so I've realized that when we do that, even though our language is there, that's language of liberty, because we're doing it with the intent of controlling or manipulating the conversation, we're actually bringing the spirit of captivity into it. And so we've got to be careful when we're quoting authorities when it comes to self-evident truths. Self-evident truths are self-evident. They have authority in and of themselves because they are self-evident. And so often we water it down by trying to put more authority to them by quoting a founder or quoting a prophet or whatever, when we can just let the principle stand on its own. And I'm not saying never use founders or prophets. I'm just saying make sure that when you're speaking that you're doing it for the right reason. You're not doing it to win the argument. The other thing, which I think is even greater, well, perhaps worse is the better word to use, than trying to win an argument by invoking the name of a founder, is trying to win an argument or to silence somebody by invoking the name of God. How often do we find ourselves guilty of saying, you know, I prayed about this? What does that tell people? If they question that, then they're questioning your ability to receive personal revelation. Or, you know, I prayed about this and the Spirit told me this is the way we need to do things. Again, you question me, you're questioning the Spirit. If you really receive that personal revelation, and it really has the power that came with that personal revelation, you do not need to express to the person that they need to not listen because you were inspired. Just simply give them the inspiration. You don't need to back it up with anything else. It's got its own power there. Because what happens most of the time, if you're listening to somebody else that says, hey, God told me this, right? Remember the movie The Blues Brothers, On a Mission from God? When you're listening to somebody, they say, God told me this, what do you think sometimes in your mind? Who died and made you the prophet? You know, or who are you to say? Or it comes across real preachy. Not all the time. Now, I want to make sure I clarify that this depends on the occasion. Remember Jefferson said the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion? There definitely are opportunities when you're speaking to a close friend or a spouse or whatever when you absolutely express that you received an answer to a prayer, felt inspiration, or whatever. But just make sure that you're not making those statements for the sole purpose of silencing the person you're communicating with. Because the moment you do that, you are bringing that person into captivity. You're manipulating the conversation. Let self-evident truths let personal revelation, let inspiration stand on its own with the authority that came with it, with the words and the power and the spirit that's behind it. Does that make sense? It's an interesting thing that I've just recently discovered, and have had to correct my own speech, because like I said, a lot of times I quote founders just simply to silence the person so they cannot question what I'm saying. So I've brought them into captivity. So I hope some of these things that we've talked about has kind of helped you understand a little bit about speaking the language of liberty. And this isn't just about talking about politics and America and all that kind of stuff. It's in your everyday conversation, inspiring people to grow and progress and do better, to be free, to literally proclaim liberty. So with that, I leave you with one last admonition: to simply go forth and proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants there. Thank you very much.
You can fill out your surveys and just